Radu Dracolia was introduced as a pivotal member of the Dragon Killer Knights, alongside Mircea Dracolia. Despite his young age, he had already slain countless dragons, was an outstanding knight, and was considered one of the strongest individuals in the Empire. Joseph reflected silently that it seemed Radu truly came from a family with dragon's blood, and that, judging solely by his reputation, Radu appeared even stronger than Rudiger. However, Joseph could not understand why the Dragon Killer Knights were once again moving in the north. He reasoned that their movement must be related to a dragon or a danger caused by one. With that in mind, Joseph asked whether there had been any recent incidents involving dragons, such as the reappearance of a deathworm or a lindblom. The man replied that nothing of the sort had been reported and added that the northern border had remained peaceful ever since the last conquest. Joseph fell into deep thought, his brows furrowing, as he wondered what the source of the anxiety he felt was, sensing that he might be missing something crucial. At that moment Vorden pushed the door open and urgently informed Lord Joseph that there was critical news from Sturma, reporting that Bayezid's eyes had been found moving suspiciously throughout the north. Both Joseph and the man froze in shock. Joseph read the letter, his expression growing grim, and questioned internally whether this was the true root of his unease. He then admitted aloud that his judgment had been wrong this time, acknowledging that Sora's power had never been Bayezid's true interest and blaming himself for failing to properly understand someone who had lived his entire life as an exorcist. The man, puzzled, asked what Joseph meant. Joseph explained that the northern churches belonging to the Vatican had begun to move, and that both the Vatican and the Dragon Killer Knights were heading toward Motium, the barony of Uthman. Only then did the man finally realize the implication and voice his shock. Joseph confirmed it, stating that what Bishop Pierre truly sought was a holy war. The scene then shifted to a forest where Vlad and Goth were eating as if they had been starving. Stefan, looking concerned, told them to eat slowly and reassured them that no one was going to take their food away. People behind them whispered among themselves, wondering just how long the two had been lost in the forest, as it did not look like they had only been starving for a few days. After finishing every last bit of food, Vlad expressed cheerfully that he felt much better now and thanked them, adding that if he and Goth had not met them, they would have been in serious trouble. Stefan reacted with surprise, remarking that he had never expected to hear something like that in his life. Vlad stared blankly at the people in front of him, inwardly wondering what was going on with them. Stefan then asked whether Vlad was not from the central region. Vlad answered that he was from the north. Stefan reacted with admiration at the mention of the north, causing Vlad to momentarily question whether he had made a mistake by saying that. Stefan quickly waved his hand and denied it, explaining that it was simply his first time meeting someone from the north, which was why he was surprised. He added that those who lived at the bottom had never once heard words of thanks from someone as high-ranking as Vlad. Vlad reflected inwardly on whether he had been too polite, concluding that the central region must place more emphasis on strict hierarchical relationships than the north. Stefan then asked where Vlad was headed. Vlad replied without hesitation that he was going to Tonabo in Vitskaya County. Stefan responded that it was a coincidence as they were also on their way to Tonabo. Suddenly Goth spoke up before Vlad could react, expressing his relief and saying that it was fortunate. Addressing Vlad as captain, he spoke casually, remarking that if they followed those people, they would eventually arrive at their destination. He admitted that he had thought they would get lost and starve to death in the forest. Vlad cursed inwardly, telling Goth to shut up in his thoughts and calling him insane. He berated him mentally for falling for bait without knowing who those people were, and questioned who it had been that insisted on trusting them, arguing earlier that looking like bumpkins would only make them targets of crime again. Goth noticed the unpleasant expression on Vlad's face but did not understand the reason behind it. At that moment, Stefan stood up and introduced himself as Stefan of the Thorn Tree Mercenaries. Vlad politely returned the greeting, initially beginning to say his full affiliation before correcting himself and stating that his name was Vlad. Stefan expressed that it was an honor to travel with him and respectfully addressed him as Sir Vlad. The scene then shifted to the main capital of Vitskaya County, Tonabo, a city regarded as a trading hub with the Eastern Elves. Because of this, many mercenaries and merchants frequently pass through. Vlad scanned his surroundings while Stefan silently assessed him, thinking that despite his youthful appearance, Vlad was undoubtedly a knight, and that it would be beneficial to build a relationship with him through a few bowls of soup and some kind words. One of the mercenaries asked whether he should look into finding some inns. Vlad replied that he already knew a few decent ones and only needed recommendations, adding that he planned to meet the lord of the area. Stefan acknowledged this, explaining that the Count's estate was the largest building in the city, and that their group would be staying at the inn at the intersection ahead. He added that if Vlad needed any help, he would know where to find them. Vlad placed a hand on his chest in gratitude, saying that it sounded good and thanking them for everything. Stefan bowed and expressed his hope that they would meet again, after which the two groups parted ways. Vlad then told Goth that he should buy them a drink later. Goth replied that Vlad should buy them something expensive instead. Surprised, Vlad asked why. Goth explained that judging by their equipment and how quickly the inspection at the castle gates had ended, they appeared to hold a fairly high position in the central region, at least to some extent. Vlad glanced in their direction and acknowledged that it made sense, adding that it would not hurt to get to know them before suggesting they move on toward the largest building. Goth curiously pointed out that all the buildings there were huge and wondered how they were supposed to find it. Eventually, the two arrived before a magnificent palace. Both of them stared in astonishment, concluding that it was obviously the place they were looking for. They stood before the gate awaiting inspection when a guard demanded that they state who they were. Vlad introduced himself as Vlad, a knight of Bazid, and said that he had come because he had a request for the Lord. The guard asked what message should be delivered. Vlad explained that he urgently needed to relay something to his master and wished to borrow a mage telegram, asking the guard to inform the count that a knight in trouble was seeking his kindness. The guard turned away, saying that he understood, and asked them to wait for a moment. Goth suggested that they might want to find an inn later, since they could be invited inside. Vlad agreed. Time passed steadily from morning to late afternoon, and even after night fell there was still no news. The two continued waiting patiently. Vlad felt a strange sense of déjà vu, thinking that he had experienced a similar situation recently. He asked the guard when they would receive a reply. The guard said he was not sure. Vlad coldly stated that it was a simple request and that he only wished to hear a response. The guard replied that they would need to wait. Vlad, growing irritated, demanded to know until when. The guard answered that they would wait until the count decided to look for them. Other guards began whispering among themselves, wondering who Vlad was. One of them said he did not know, but had heard that Vlad was from the north, adding mockingly that it explained the musty smell lingering since earlier, calling it the stench of a barbarian. Another guard warned him to be careful because Vlad could hear them. The first guard scoffed, saying it did not matter and questioning what a northern vagabond could do there. Vlad's patience finally reached its limit, and he wondered if this was what the elder had meant. He recalled the elder's words, which claimed that people from the central region, especially city elites and their subordinates, were all the same. They believed the center of the continent was the center of the world, and considered themselves inherently noble, looking down on westerners and northerners, whom they believed carried barbarian blood. The elder had warned that the central region's discrimination was colder than northern snow. Vlad angrily spoke up, demanding to know whether he was being treated as a joke. A guard responded disdainfully, asking for pardon and insisting that was not what he had said. Goth spoke in a low voice, calling out to his captain. Vlad took the item Goth handed him and declared firmly that he was waiting for a reply, not permission. The guards were startled as Vlad unfolded a flag. They shouted in alarm, accusing him of daring to plant a flag before the count's estate and declaring that such disrespect would not be tolerated until they suddenly noticed something. One guard stammered in shock upon recognizing the banner as that of the heavenly dragon lineage. Vlad spoke sternly, stating that even if he was merely a knight, he was still entitled to hear the count's response, and he reiterated that he was waiting. Lord Tonabo, Count Vitskaya, asked while continuing his meal how old Vlad was. Vlad looked straight at him and replied that he was 18 years old that year. Hearing this, Count Vitskaya expressed his disbelief and questioned whether Vlad at only 18 had already slain a dragon. Vlad calmly confirmed that he had been 17 at the time of the dragon's death. Without lifting his head from his food, Count Vitskaya then pressed further, stating that he had heard Vlad had hung the insignia of the Dragon Killer Knights on his banner. Vlad answered without emotion that this was indeed true. Narrowing his eyes and studying him with a dark expression, the Count demanded to know who had permitted him to use that insignia. Thinking of him, Vlad answered resolutely that the permission had come from the captain of the Dragon Killer Knights, Sir Mercia Dracolia. At those words, Count Vitskaya froze, his fork stopping just short of his lips. He slowly set the utensil down onto the plate in silence, interlacing his fingers and resting his chin upon them. He fixed Vlad with a murderous gaze, inwardly thinking that this filthy northern barbarian dared to utter the name of a noble he had no right to impersonate. Aloud, he warned that if Vlad's statement proved false, he would meet his demise on the spot. At the same time, the two knights beside the Count placed their hands on their swords, awaiting his command. Count Vitskaya continued to stare at Vlad. However, Vlad showed no fear and firmly asserted that he had personally slain Lindblom, and that Sir Mercia had witnessed the act. He then added coldly, emphasizing each word, that there were no lies in his testimony. The knights standing behind Vlad also kept their hands on their swords, not daring to relax without an order. Meanwhile, Count Vitskaya slightly curled his lips into a smile, thinking that the young man did not flinch at all. After a moment he looked at Vlad and asked whether he wished to borrow a mage. Vlad answered affirmatively, explaining that he carried urgent news that he needed to deliver to his lord. Count Vitskaya frowned and let out a low grunt. silently calculating that there was no precedent for a northern knight borrowing a magical telegram in his territory, and that he would normally refuse such a request. However, he admitted to himself that curiosity had gotten the better of him. He then asked Vlad what he needed the telegram for, remarking that he seemed to be in great haste. Meeting the Count's gaze, Vlad explained that a few days earlier in the forest of Dobrekiti, he had encountered a wicked existence. Recalling the monster he had stumbled upon, he stated that it was a creature unknown in the north, but that the locals had called it a troll based on his description. As if remembering something troubling, he continued that the creature was afflicted by a curse that prevented it from dying, no matter how many times it was killed. Upon hearing this, Count Vitskaya began to sweat, his eyes filled with weary suspicion, and questioned what Vlad meant by saying it would not die even after being killed. Images of undead hordes flashed through Vlad's mind as he explained that a similar incident had occurred in the north in the past, leading him to suspect that something unknown was slowly beginning to stir. The surrounding knights broke into a cold sweat and whispered among themselves that it made no sense and questioned what Vlad could mean. At that moment, Count Vitskaya lifted his wine cup and asked where this incident had taken place. With a cold gaze, Vlad replied that it had occurred in Dobrekiti of House Dalmatia, and added that since it was the closest city to the location, he had traveled without stopping to reach it. Count Vitskaya maintained a composed expression as he casually took a sip of wine, yet countless doubts were already swirling in his mind. He wondered why Vlad, who clearly had his own matters to attend to, would still come here merely to warn him. As he observed Vlad more closely, the Count silently reflected that the look in the man's eyes made him feel as though Vlad was reproaching him for having treated him poorly. After a moment, Count Vitskaya waved his hand toward the captain of the guard beside him, and instructed him to lend the crystal ball to their guest from the north. Upon hearing this, Vlad slightly bowed his head and expressed his gratitude. The Count then spoke again, stating that he apologized for having kept Vlad waiting outside. He explained that many knights had recently come seeking an audience, so he had assumed Vlad was simply one of them. When he told Vlad to proceed and make his report, Vlad stood up, placed a hand over his chest, bowed and replied that he understood and would take his leave. With that, he turned around and departed from the Count's reception hall. Once Vlad had left, Count Vitskaya's expression darkened as he issued an order to find out the truth at once. The captain of the guard immediately acknowledged the command and said that they would send people to dock it right away. However, before he could finish speaking, the Count erupted in fury, shouting that this was not what he meant and berating the captain as useless. He angrily demanded that they investigate whether Vlad had truly slain a dragon, whether he really was a knight of Bayezid, and to uncover everything related to that man. Seeing Count Vitskaya's explosive rage, the guards all bowed their heads in fear as he ordered them to get out immediately. Watching them leave, the Count snorted in irritation. He pressed his fingers to his temples and ground his teeth as he muttered bitterly, questioning the point of spending money when all he gathered were idiots. However, his expression soon turned sinister as he reflected that although Vlad was rough around the edges, he possessed dignity. Recalling Vlad's deep blue eyes like a vast galaxy, Count Vitskaya speculated that the man might not know his place and might be arrogant, yet he also had the confidence to back it up. Frowning and holding his forehead, the Count concluded to himself that Vlad could prove useful. Sometime later, at the location where the crystal ball was kept, Vlad stared at it with wide eyes and asked in confusion if the explanation could be repeated once more. The mage of the crystal ball explained that sending a magic telegram costs 1 gold per character and that the price would be even higher if the distance was great. Upon hearing this, Goth rolled his eyes and whispered in disbelief, wondering if the man was insane since they had barely squeezed 10 gold out of Baron Dalmatia. However, the mage narrowed his eyes and smiled reassuringly, telling them not to worry about the cost. He explained that since they were the Count's guests, they were allowed to use it for free. This immediately delighted Goth, who exclaimed that the mage should have said that earlier, as he had thought a single telegram would leave them completely broke. The mage then placed his hand on the crystal ball and politely asked for Sora's wavelength number. Vlad, however, looked utterly confused and apologized, asking what the word wavelength meant. The mage then explained that in order to send a magic telegram, one needed to know the wavelength number of the region. Vlad once again appeared baffled and turned to Goth, asking if he knew it. Goth, equally stunned, pointed to himself and questioned whether Vlad really meant him. Seeing this, the mage panicked internally, forced an awkward smile, and said that he would look it up himself and relay the information to them. After the matter was settled, and the mage left, Goth marveled that if they had gone to just any mage, they might have ended up completely stuck. Vlad, on the other hand, questioned why the whole process had to be so complicated. He then fell silent, reflecting that he now understood he had stepped outside Bayezid's fence, and that merely knowing how to swing a sword did not make one a knight. Vlad sighed inwardly, acknowledging that he still had a long way to go. Suddenly Goth spoke up and shared his thoughts, remarking that although their start here had not exactly been pleasant, he believed it was a good thing that they had become acquainted with the Count. Vlad looked at him in confusion and asked what he meant by that. Goth then explained seriously that he had asked the attendants a few questions earlier, and they had told him that all the decorations were gifts from the elves. Hearing this, Vlad was startled and reacted with shock. Vlad came to a halt and surveyed the items displayed throughout the vast chamber, wondering whether everything in the room belonged there. Goth gestured toward a painting hanging on the wall and remarked that it was said elves did not allow just anyone to enter their lands, which implied that the Count must have opened a trade route. In other words, such access could not exist otherwise. The two of them stood before the gold-framed painting of a fairy, and Goth went on to state that the Count was capable of communicating with the elves. Time passed quietly, and that night, within Count Vitskaya's manor, Vlad sat alone in his room, lost in thought. A green spiritual glow flickered within his eye as he stared intently at the brilliant golden gem embedded in the hilt of his sword. Suddenly, a powerful light illuminated his face as dense particles of spiritual energy burst forth from the gem. At that moment, Vlad beheld the vision of an ancient tree with golden leaves standing at the top of a hill, alive and vibrant. He questioned inwardly what kind of place it was, sensing that it was both powerful and beautiful, yet somehow tinged with sadness. Raising his sword, he reflected to himself that, as expected, it was still difficult to maintain that world for long. Though at least he was able to glimpse it little by little, he noted that the vision was far hazier than when he had perceived it through the world of voices. After some time, sweat dripped down his face, and Vlad let out a heavy breath. Sitting cross-legged on the bed while still holding his sword, he thought that if his own world were to grow deeper, he would eventually be able to see that place clearly. He closed his eyes tightly and focused his mind, silently reaffirming his resolve. A knock at the door suddenly drew his attention. The person outside respectfully asked whether Sir Vlad had a moment. Vlad opened the door and inquired what the matter was. He then saw the captain of Count Vitskaya's guard standing there with several men. The captain formally apologized for disturbing his rest and proposed that they have a sparring match. Vlad found the suggestion puzzling and questioned it, prompting the captain to explain that it was nothing serious, merely a light warm-up before going to sleep. Fearing Vlad might refuse, the captain added that northern knights rarely visited Tonabo, and that it would be an honor if Vlad could grant them the precious opportunity to experience the swordsmanship of the north. Though Vlad could not tell how sincere the words truly were, he hesitated slightly. Then he noticed the self-satisfied smiles worn by the soldiers standing behind the captain. Vlad reflected that there was only one way to break needless discrimination and contempt, and a faint smile curved his lips. He calmly agreed, stating that since they had helped him send a telegram and provided him with a comfortable place to sleep, it was only natural for him to pay a fair price in return. However, as a powerful aura surged from his body, he emphasized each word, declaring that this was about proving oneself.